Thanks for tuning in to this episode of I Have Something to Say, where subject matter experts are unafraid and unapologetic about sharing their perspectives regarding issues that impact our lives. They speak up because basically they give a shit. So if you're tired of canned answers and want to finally hear real people cut through the BS and talk about real issues, this is the podcast for you. I'm your host, Sami Jimen Marrero from Urbender, and behind our mixer is our producer, Chris Majoka from UdoU. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this episode of I Have Something to Say, where Chris is co-hosting today with me. Hi, Chris. And we have as our guest a dear friend, Blanca Catalina Garcia. The moment we got on a call together, it was like, instant connection, instant, like we were here, just completely on the same wave, on the same wavelength, the same circuit, right? Whatever you want to call it, since we're going to talk about tech. And just a quick introduction, because, people will just get to learn how fabulous you are, the moment you start speaking. But Blanca Catalina Garcia is an innovation, entrepreneurship, and leadership educator. And you're an entrepreneur yourself, with BCG Innovation, and you have your tentacles, but in a good way, with the nonprofit sector, with academia. You work with the corporate sector. You really have been able to expand like the scope of the work you do, from startups or just people that have no idea where to begin, that they're in the ideation, phase of starting their own businesses, to big companies that are already, making it, and that maybe want to then, pursue other avenues or incorporate other markets or new technologies, or even be more equitable in providing, diverse talent access, right, to job opportunities and even business opportunities like supplier diversity too, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So would you like me to expand on that, or?
Yeah. And how you came to, because I know that you have a wealth of experience, but how and why you hyper focus on helping women of color who want to become entrepreneurs or in the process of growing their businesses.
Yeah. So, it's interesting because I think it was just one of those things where I was called to the table to do that. I'd been working as an educator in multicultural, multilingual communities, and really so focusing on the translation for growth and success. So what I mean by that is, yes, I was an actual interpreter, but a lot of the work that I was doing was about bringing in knowledge or skills to navigate spaces that are closed off somehow to a community of people. And so when I started working in entrepreneurship, given that was the work that I was doing, it was natural to move into working with women of color entrepreneurs, because that's typically the community of people that are closed off from a lot of the opportunities and the spaces that where there's opportunities for success and where there's resources and capital and so on. And we all know this. We know that that BIPOC entrepreneurs, that especially BIPOC women entrepreneurs, are the ones that are really struggling the most to access capital, to access mentorship, to access support in their businesses, even though they're also the ones that are entering the entrepreneurial space at the highest rate.
Yeah.
So I guess it was serendipitous, where there was an opportunity to bring these skills that I'd been developing in somewhat of another area into this growing space. And also because, I became an entrepreneur through this work, really, because
Mm-hmm.
I didn't identify as an entrepreneur. And I hear this a lot from
Mm-hmm.
the entrepreneurs I work with. They'll say like, well, even at my school, if I went, going to college, I wasn't part of the business program, or I didn't join the entrepreneurial program or process that they had there, because it didn't resonate with me. I didn't identify with it. It didn't seem accessible to me, even
Mm-hmm.
though, even in the cases where they would often say, I knew I was going to be an entrepreneur. I knew I was going to build something of my own. It was closed off.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I've had the opportunity. I got lucky that I had some good mentors and people who kind of opened the door to this space, so that I kind of had the opportunity through my work to dig into why that is.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really been a question of like learn and apply as I'm going, I'm like
Yeah.
in this journey with them, and like learning and listening, and then I'm going back and I'm teaching and I'm saying, hey, so here's how we can get in here, or here's the language you use here, or or let me just show you what I just learned, or let me bring you some other women that are they're 3, 5 steps ahead of us.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really what it's been. I mean, it might look cool on the outside, but it's kind of scrappy in reality.
Yeah, I think it's wonderful. And the thing is, I've had firsthand experience, just attending, and I'm so thankful that you sent me that invitation, to participate in one of the virtual graduations of one of the most recent cohorts that you had this past fall I think it was closing last year. And
Mhm.
I'm like, I wound up, I was about to start bawling, but of course I didn't, tried to keep it together, but I got very emotional because you could hear from the very women. And then since you're focusing on women, uh, how what what it meant for them, to go through this process and then have a living, tangible business, after how many weeks was it? Because it was pretty intense, from what if I understand, that they came out of this with a plan, like they knew exactly what they were doing. There was no fluff, there was no doubt, it was all confidence. And it was just spectacular. Also, the mentors that you were able to secure, the guidance and the way they were able to articulate the path forward, like that's it, they were set, and so do you follow up with these women? Because it was a really big group too, like maybe, what was it, like 10 or 15? How many women was it? Because I was so impressed. um
Yeah.
do
Yes.
you follow up
So
with that? Yeah.
so what you're describing is the graduation of the Prospectus Latina Accelerator program that I led out of Walker's Legacy,
Mm-hmm.
founded by Natalie Mariela Caulfield, who recently stepped down to take this really exciting opportunity with our government, leading small business initiatives. Um, and that, you know, I'm so glad you were there too, because it was a magical experience that, I
Mm-hmm.
mean, I don't know if other people who are teaching entrepreneurial programs would describe their programs as magical experiences.
Right.
But I would, and I think it has to do with exactly what you just witnessed, which was our connected community, like heart connected community. And I was also ready to bawl at that graduation. I was like holding back tears because you're right. It was 10 weeks. And the whole
Mm-hmm.
idea of the program is to go through the basics of business, and so it's really set up for people who may have already started a business and
Mm-hmm.
want to grow. But we really had a spectrum of women. It was such a great group. It was this wonderful, like, flagship group, because
Mm-hmm.
it was women, uh, all the way from ideation, like they just had an idea, to women who have an established businesses. So some of the women that were there had businesses that they had been running for anywhere between 7 to 9 years. And but everybody came to the table together because first, you're always learning, you're always growing. And this is something that I have definitely learned, across the board from my mature entrepreneurs who maybe have a wonderful business. And then you talked with them and they're like, yes, but there's all these gaps, these things that I don't know, because I really have just been pulling it together this whole time. And then having these women that really want to get into this space but don't really know how to navigate it. Like, how do I do this thing of like owning my own business? And the best part of that was that it epitomized how I've had the opportunity to be parts of these communities of learning where we come with our full selves. And this is like a key part of how women and women of color enter entrepreneurship, where a lot of times the businesses that we are building have everything to do with, we're solving a problem that we understand from our very unique lived experience. And very rarely in most other spaces, as you know, as women, as BIPOC people, it's about shrinking and reshaping yourself for other spaces, right? Because that space was not made for you. So you have to take on a role.
You have to conform, right?
Right. You have to conform. You have to sort of like, smush yourself into something that feels acceptable, non-threatening. And we had a space where that, as much as we could, we let that go. And this is something that I have started to do with all of the groups that we do. Right at the beginning, we talked about what kind of space do we want to have, and what do we all want to bring to that space, and what do we agree to bring to that space, and to take care of each other so that we can show up that way. And then so they send me all the things that they feel are part of that agreement, and then I make like an agreement sheet. And it's so awesome. It's this community of love that is the foundation of that learning experience. So yes, we're learning about whatever legal structures, but the foundation of that space is based on this mutual caring for that whole person. There's a lot of humanity there, and the core of it being our community.
Yeah.
And that lends itself to a whole different learning experience. And I've found it to be, I think it's the kind of thing that is great for everyone, but particularly for these communities where so many of the women there are just constantly navigating spaces where they are not safe and they cannot bring their full selves. So I think you saw that.
Yeah, I did.
And I forgot to answer your question. Okay, so I don't want to forget
the follow-up. Yes, do you follow up?
This is it's one of those things where you just bond. I have friendships from learning spaces that I've led, and most of those women, I would consider them my friends, and they're people we stay in contact. And we continue to build things together. Some of them then become entrepreneur educators themselves, or I've started business projects. We're starting business projects and all kinds of things with the women that have been in these kinds of groups. So yes, we do stay friends. We do stay in touch.
That's great. That's really fantastic. And so I know that your sweet spot is tech, right? That's one, like, the tech environment, and being that most people, that are successful in tech or that, that basically rule the roost, right? In tech are white males. Let's just be real. How do you see the future and women becoming more technologically, abled, or have gained more access, because you talked about those barriers, or those spaces where they just can't enter. So what does that look like? What can be done, or what do you see, if anything, changing, in terms of women and women of color too, more, having more, gaining more access, aunque sea poco a poco, even if it's a little bit at a time, and in what key areas, do you see any trends since you're so in it?
Yeah, yeah. So you're absolutely right. I mean, this is a widespread problem in general in the tech space, in the STEM space. We have a lot of need to build a more diverse pipeline of technologists. And that's because historically, not only has it been a male-dominated space, but the tech space has also been not a very positive space. We just talked about safe spaces and brave spaces and spaces of community where you can bring your full self.
It kind of doesn't jive, right? It's like you're talking about two different, So how do you coach women providing this safe space where they can be themselves and they can show up, authentically, and grow and nurture each other and lean in on, because quite frankly, it doesn't exist even in the corporate sector. That whole, to change organizational cultures, it takes 10 years, or more, and some organizations, whether they're tech or not, are like so far behind in creating those environments where everybody has an equal chance of thriving, right? And so how do you coach women who are just starting this journey into specifically like tech and entrepreneurship, so they can navigate, these uncharted territories, not just for her, just for all of us, anybody that would identify like them?
Yeah. So first, I have to give a shout out. Like, this is not some like thing that just comes from my mind. Like, a lot of the things that I'm bringing to the learning spaces that I'm leading are coming from conversations with this incredible community of women that really lead breaking into these spaces and have been doing it, and so so they teach me a lot. People like Natalie Molina Nino, Carla Monterroso, who leads Code 2040 out on the West Coast. This wonderful up-and-coming young leader, Ariana Abramson. So many amazing people who really have been in the trenches and have pioneered into the tech space. There's a great group here in that has a chapter here in Atlanta called Tequeria, led by Margarita Caraballo and Brian Trejo, and these are people that are part of my community, and I legit go to them and say, "Hey, this is happening. What's a way that you're confronting this? How have you figured this out?" So it's messy. So a few things that come to mind, and I really loved when you invited me to this podcast. The question that you asked me, I loved it because you were like, can you talk about like how we can best coach, women of color entrepreneurs or women entering tech. And that's such a great way of framing it, because so many programs and so many of the things that we do in entrepreneur education, it puts the onus on the founder. So it's like, okay, so if you want investment, you got to get that executive summary, make sure you've got a good pitch. You got to be a good storyteller. Your financials need to make sense. Like how you need to show up, how you need to show up, which it's great. It's really important because, you have to learn the rules and the code of the space that you're entering, because the tech space, I would compare it to like the Victorian English court. It's that full of rules
Right.
and that subtle and that exclusivist. So it's like, if you come in acting a fool and like, I don't know, you got your dress is too high and they can see your ankles, that's it. They're done with you.
You're out. Exactly.
Right. So you have to know the rules, and having that that guidance and those mentors is really important. But the other side of that is really kind of, putting that responsibility and that accountability on the people that are in the tech space who say that they want to be a part of a change. Well, so in part, my message is to them. And I say this with all the love and affection of the incredible mentors and people who are in the space and who have like opened those doors and really made an effort to make that happen. One is, them really thinking about the fact that women of color are managing they're spinning so many other plates. So the pathway, So I remember we in another group that I was a part of at the big incubator that's part of Digital Undivided that was here in Atlanta a couple of years ago. One of the founders brought and showed us this graphic of the Instagram founders, the pathway to their success in building that technology company, and we just all looked at it and laughed. We were like, oh, okay, so you did this and you did that. And we just laughed because it was so ludicrous to think that any of us could do any of those things, anywhere from like borrow $20,000 from our buddy to, staying up till 3 a.m. working on some product build when we have little kids and second jobs and elderly parents that we're caring for. Like our work does not stop when we shut our laptops, where it's so their pathway has to be different. So when you make assumptions about what that really looks like, and we are still figuring it out. I'm part of a community of people that are still figuring out what is the pathway for people into technology entrepreneurship. We don't know what that actually looks like for other types of founders, because the pathway for, a economically privileged white male has been tracked. And that's when you read these books, these business books, that everybody loves to tote, they're talking about that pathway. Yep. They're not talking about the other one. So that's one. And just making, okay. So I was mentioning to you that we were out in the mountains, in the Georgia mountains this last weekend, and we went to go see Amacola Falls, which is this beautiful falls up in North Georgia in the Blue Ridge Mountains. And there's actually, so when you get to the park, there's a couple of entrances like, oh, you can go this way or you can go that. And the woman that was there was just like, oh, just go this way. And I'm with my little kids. And so we're like, okay, great. And we're on this hike. And families are coming down opposite from us, and they seem just hunky-dory, and we are just all sweating. Like, and I'm thinking to myself, like, wow, I'm getting old. Like, I can barely handle this hike. And, you see these little kids walking down, they're fine. And my kids are like, oh, Mom, I'm hungry. I won't be able to make it. And so we finally make it to the top, and we realize that we had taken like the 5-mile trek up that's really supposed to be the way down, and there's like this a whole other way up to the top that's got like railings and like that, that sort of like rubbery paved and like little rest stops. So all these families that we're looking at them, we're going like, what's wrong with us that we can barely handle this, and they seem to be just fine and doing it fine. And my friend and I were hiking, and she just kind of looked at me and she said, how this is like a perfect metaphor of how we make assumptions about, what how we're doing in comparison to how somebody else is doing, and how often as women we often put the onus on ourselves, like, what's wrong with me that
Right.
I can't do it, that I'm so exhausted, that this is so hard. And without realizing that for a lot of other people that we're comparing ourselves to, they had a lot more support, and they're that we're treading a very hard path that's not as often trodden and
Right.
talked about.
Right. 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 And in this case, it was also that bitch that sent you the wrong way. So there's always that.
I thought about her.
Of course.
I thought about her.
She's the gatekeeper. It's like, hey, you go that way. You know?
You're right. That is actually a really important metaphor.
That's another part of the analogy, Mama. Yes.
Yes.
Yes. You know,
Yes.
person that, you know, that sees you coming and says, no, it's not your time. And then how do you decide? Why do you decide when, you know? And so, yeah. So anyway, so I just needed to throw that in there because,
No, actually, I think that kind of comes down to, you know, what you're talking about earlier of just, well, it comes down to an access point of, like you mentioned that you didn't necessarily always want to go into entrepreneurship, or you didn't feel like it was accessible to you. Part of it is, you know, like you said, all the rules in the tech community that you have to follow. I mean, it is on the, you know, I'm the white male on this call here, and it is on the white male, you know, in a situation where people are being underserved or underrepresented or not getting access, to adjust those rules, and not expect everybody to fit that one model, and be like, well, if you can't fit the model, you can't make it to this point. It's like, well, how about we address what you know, this point is, and maybe this point or this destination needs to look a little different to make it more accessible for other people. Just, you know, one example of that, in having worked in the arts community and doing some diversity initiatives there, you know, one of the dancing organizations was like, oh, well, you know, we put out invitations to people of color, but, you know, but people can't do this style of dance. So then I beg the question, well, have you considered adjusting or including a new style of dance that more people would, you know, that
be
other
interested.
white people, right, exactly. And I think that is part of the thing, because, you know, to your point, there's a lack of resources on the different strategies that a woman of color would have to go through versus a white male. But then, you know, in addition to just the strategy, yeah, what does that landscape look like? And, you know, too often, white people will say, well, you know, it's up to the people of color to tell us what to do right. And, you know, that's not, it takes going out of your comfort zone. You know, the path of short-term least resistance isn't necessarily the, you know, the path to long-term success. And so you have to step out, have those conversations to say, okay, well, let's look at our workforce. If we're, you know, 80% white males, and we want to expand that further, then you actually have to go into those communities or have conversations with an entrepreneurship coach like yourself and say, okay, you're dealing with a cohort of, you know, a BIPOC women, and we want more of those. So what can we do to change ourselves to be more inviting to that environment? So, I mean, the struggle is real, and unfortunately, there's too many people that are content at the top to say, you know, well, it's up to them to figure out how to make it. But, you know, I think it's really great what you're doing and building that safe environment for people to be able to determine what that, you know, that agreement looks like for everybody to be held accountable to. And I think if more people could be open to that environment, because as a coach, that must be somewhat difficult, because your, you know, your environment will be different every time based on that agreement. But that's you stepping out of your comfort zone to make sure other people have that chance to feel safe. So if we can amplify that, I think that's where the key is.
That's the thing, right? It's asking the right questions and getting also the right commitment. You know, it's like sometimes, you know, as an entrepreneur that works in the DEI, you know, space, you know, many times we encounter people or companies or organizations, they're like, oh, we want to do, become more diverse and inclusive and, and equitable in the way we engage and, hire or whatever it is, right? And then, we always push back and say, so how committed are you really? Because, where's the CEO and where's the, because it really requires, like you just said, Chris, it's like it requires more of a horizontal approach instead of like this, vertical approach, but it's like finding that space where everybody can come to the table, be respectful and inquisitive, about what are your needs, what are your concerns, what does that look like? Help me understand how that feels, to take the hike, instead of going, the shortcut, and how did I contribute to that, and have that space to heal and to explore, how you're the freaking problem,
Yep.
and so, but not be disrespectful about it, and Chris, you stand corrected in one thing. You're not a white male, you're a white woke male. So
right.
we need also, right, to be able to come to terms that this is not a competition, it's not a pissing match, it's not, it's not a takeover. It's not, no, this is just a reality of what the demographic profile of this country is. It's becoming more diverse, and it just is what it is. So you need to embrace it or you're not going to grow. Even companies that aren't practicing, don't have best practices, in engaging with diverse populations in all of their buckets or areas or need areas, are going to be behind. It's just a fact. If you don't take a deep dive, and learn, like you said, like you're constantly learning. I'm constantly learning too. I learn every day. And I love it. Not only from a diversity aspect, but also from a generational aspect. I'm already, well into my, working career, but I love to, like we were talking before offline, when I met Chris, the technology aspect and how to, produce content using technology. It's like, give me a pen and some paper and I'll write you a good blog, but to have a partner, a collaborator that we can then come together and then create, new things and special, what we feel is special anyway, environments, is really, really great. And I feel like you do that every single day with, people that are, and especially now, in December, 140,000 Americans left the workforce and 100% of them were women, and mostly women for those same reasons that you say. It's like, how do I juggle my ailing parents plus the kids plus it's just impossible. I know I go crazy, and I want to run away sometimes. So I can't imagine someone that's starting from scratch, it must be really, really difficult. Can you share with us like a story that started off, or an anecdote, of something that was like chaotic and that you were able to bring in the right resources or support and then transform what could have been like a moment, or that was a moment of desperation or of just complete loss, for like a next step, and that you could see that transformation happen pretty quickly and in a meaningful way.
Yeah. That's a and that happens all the time. Really, because there's so many of, so what happens with a lot of founders, especially if they don't know really what this is about. So they're learning to be entrepreneurs and they're learning to be, sorry about that. And they're learning to be, women or BIPOC women in this space. So
Right.
there's both learning curves, right?
Yeah.
And so a lot of times they're not sure what it is that they're supposed to be focusing on. And you'll hear this a lot from coaches and people in the space where, you have founders say like, oh, I just need some money. If somebody will, give me some capital or offer me an investment, like I know I can I can turn this company into something different. And a lot of times that's because that's what they've heard. Think of somebody who is really kind of outside of the conversation, and then or outside of the party rather. It's sort of like you would imagine like, oh, if I was invited to like, the Oscars party, what would I wear and what would I do? And you imagine yourself, and there's all this like optics to it, right? So
Right.
you see one thing, but the truth is you don't actually know how it works.
Yeah.
Or how people get there, or what it took for certain things to look a certain way. And so, it's sort of like, oh, I just need the dress. And a lot of times I'll say, I'll ask questions, like I'll try to dig into what is it that they're doing. Like, let's go to the foundational things, like the why of why you got into this business, how that positions you to address the problem. Do you have clarity on the problem that you're solving? These sort of like key foundational questions, and like reframing. But it's also, here's the thing, is that when you're juggling a lot of things, more so, it's harder to take a step back because you're in it all the time. So a lot of times it's just, having the opportunity to work with someone who mentors you or creates a learning space for you is they give you that time. They give you the time to just stop, step back. Let's look at what it really looks like. And so, like I was working with a founder who was part of the cohort, and she just had a side business that she'd been doing forever. And, I can always tell from an entrepreneur if they really want to make this something else, like they want to grow in it, but there's not a lot of confidence around it. And so it was a lot of conversations about that, the sort of foundational piece, but also kind of digging into some of those fears. Like, what is that fear about? Like this, I'll hear this a lot. And this founder brought that up. Well, I have a job and I need that job for now because I need that job as long as I need to like pay bills, I need that job. So what would happen if they found out that I am also doing this business? And, it's funny because if she wasn't who she was, she probably, like, if she was a white guy, like she would get celebrated for doing all these cool things, right? In her mind, she's thinking like, this could be a threat to my livelihood. There's a lot of that sort of scarcity thinking, and sort of reframing those fears. Like, you're doing something that's so outside of your industry, they probably wouldn't even notice until you like were ready to do it.
Right.
Like they don't care that much. But
Exactly. It's
but
like
also sorry, go ahead.
It's like memo to the Latina entrepreneur. Yeah, it's like you're not top of mind.
No, not top of
as long as it's not interfering with like your regular job. Yeah,
exactly.
Fine. And then it's also just that it's like that, and that's a practice that learning to distinguish between what you think is something external, that's real, that you've learned to contend with because that is a part of your survival. And this inner voice that you need to battle. So I guess all of that is to say, I was helping this founder get out of her own way. And then after the program, she did a launch party and she upped her inventory and she redid, and it's like, all of this stuff started happening, right? And it wasn't like just magically she produced it. It was all just kind of sitting there in this holding pattern.
Give it permission to happen.
To let it go. And that's a big part of the community aspect of creating a learning space for BIPOC women entrepreneurs is we give each other permission, and we trust each other's power and talent and ability, sometimes more than we do ourselves. And it's sort of like that trust, you kind of integrate it. And
Yeah.
it's the practice of being in a space where people believe in you, are excited for you, feel that you are entitled to success and to owning your life.
Yeah.
That is actually sort of like the antithesis of what most of us experience in the, sort of quote unquote real world, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Yes. Absolutely.
yeah.
It's so liberating though when you find your people, and
Yeah.
it could be anyone. It doesn't have to be a fellow Latina. I'm just saying your people in the sense where that you meet people and their fellow business owners. I think that's the richest source for me.
Yes.
Of is that peer-to-peer mentorship. It's like we bounce ideas off each other. Well, that's how I met Chris. That's how I met you, Blanca. Everybody in my work life that I'm currently they're either currently working with is either a client, a long time, how do you say, ambassador of our business that opens doors, or a collaborator. Honestly, like someone that's like, and then it's seamless too. Like I'm doing business with Chris. We're doing business together too, Blanca. We're working on a big project. I'm actually working with both of you. Right. You know what I'm saying? But it's on two different, on very different, projects, but it's seamless. It's like when we get on these calls, you could feel it. You could feel how it's, it's very integrated. It's in a spirit of really weighing in, leaning in on each other, being there for each other, rooting each other on, celebrating, everything together. And then I just feel like the ego part is, out of the equation. And I think that's a big factor too. And I think that's what helps develop the trust, right? To really, being connected to how we can't work in silos. That we can't do it alone, and that if we come together, we can do bigger and greater things and look beyond, right, this superficial packaging, that we came into this world in, and really connect at that deeper level and find the strengths in others and say, yeah, I need me some of that. I don't need to necessarily learn it.
Yep.
But if we come together, look how much stronger we are. So I think that's fantastic. Mm-hmm.
I agree that the community piece is key. It's so key that if you walk away at all from this with anything, walk away with that, like the understanding that of reaching out to fellow people with whom you have synergy, that are your champions. It's key. And it's the way that you share learning. And like you said, it's like, it's not just, it can be anyone. I mean, it is, it's kind of, it's like what we were saying, like it's about also finding those tech guys who are willing to put on a learning mindset.
Yes.
Who want to walk into that because they want to grow and understand what is your experience like, even just because that's exciting and important. And that's the person that they are, that's a part of your community too. But you don't, once you have that community, you don't have to ask yourself like, how do I do this? Or how do I confront this? Because you don't have to have all the answers.
Right.
Yeah. Yes.
So
exactly.
It's key.
Exactly. It is key. Now that you mentioned that about finding those tech guys, right? That, are Caucasian and, just, and male, that they're, that they're working in that space, that are open and that they want to learn. Right. That they're not on this high horse. And it's so funny you mentioned that, because we've been working, as with some folks, out in the Bay Area and Silicon Valley. And we've encountered that. And there's one person in particular, white male, that he told us, and I'm talking about myself and Lakeisha, is like, wow, but he wasn't coming from a place of offense. He wasn't offensive. He's like, wow, now I get it. You guys are exercising your experience and the power, the confidence that you've built, you know, throughout, you know, like you're not timid, you're not shy. And the thing is, I've never experienced that. I've never been in a meeting with women of color, you know, that just take over or participate equally in a conversation, you know, because, you know, they have the knowledge and I'm like, yeah, we exist. Yes, we're here, you know. So,
well, but also
for him to say that was, you know, and I'm like, oh my God, we love you, you know, for him to be so, you know, and we become really good friends, you know, because of it, and then he calls it, he knows he can call us, and that we're not going to say, why are you asking me that? You know that we're like, because we know he's coming from a place of caring, what we started off with, you know, about that really caring, and that's helped build trust with him. Yeah. So.
And I love that, because you guys show up that way because you are already building community and spaces in which you practice showing up in your full power. So that becomes the habit rather than the scarcity and fear habit, which is really what other like the dominant institutions, the corporate job, you know, even if you're at the table, I'm the only woman, I'm the only Black person, whatever, you know, you're going to be in a situation where you're going to be encouraged to remember your place when you're that's what it is.
Yeah.
So when you're continually cultivating community and relationship, and you build and work with other people who expect you to show up in your full power, and you practice that becomes the habit. So then you show up in other spaces where other people expect you to be small and you're big, and people are like, wow, whoa, where did you come from? And you're, you know, with the other side of that, you know, having this relationship with white men who have a lot of the social power, it's so key, because once you get into these like smaller little, you know, the towers of these, you know, of these pathways, there is no way you are getting in unless one of those guys opens the door and says, yo, take a seat. She's my guest.
Yep.
Yes, exactly.
You know?
Exactly. So, yeah, absolutely. That's why we have Chris too. He opened. I'm like, okay, Chris, you make that call.
Right.
You're gonna help us open that door. Well, and even your technical knowledge, Chris, even the fact that you have you have mastery of this, and there was maybe, you know, in part it's your talent, it's your capacity, and also it's the fact that like maybe you had access to those stairs while I was trudging on the rocks.
Exactly.
But you're going like, okay, here, come on, I'm going to show you how to come in here and make that connect, and therefore, you know, this whole experience becomes that much richer for you.
Right.
Yes. And attainable. That's the thing. Yep. So where I had fear of producing like this podcast, you know, a couple of years ago, I'm like, I don't even know where to begin. Chris is like, don't worry about it. Let's do this together. You know, and it was a passion project that now it's become, you know, a moneymaker too, which is right, Chris. That's like the gravy on top of it, you know. But what I'm saying is, so he provided a safe space, you know, to say, I understand that you may not, you know, either have access or have the knowledge or the time, you know, I don't have time to learn technology, quite frankly. He knows, you know, with my kids and everything, because Chris and I are like family, right? So he knows, you know, the shit that goes on over here. But, you know, so he understands that. He says, I'll come, I'll be your teacher. I'll be your mentor. And then we do that cross mentoring all the time, because sometimes he has questions because his business is much younger than ours. So he'll call and he say, hey, I'm in a pickle here. I don't know, you know, could you, you know, and so we do that, you know, and so it's a really fruitful, you know, loving, caring relationship. And also we're like a fierce guardians of each other too. And that's where the trust, really, there's a lot of trust there. So,
and I think a big clarifying element is, we were talking about the white male tech leaders that be. But this isn't about like, yeah, sure, the moral aspect of helping someone else who hasn't been provided the same opportunities. But it's not really a handout. I mean, this is something that, like, the motivating factor is that by diversifying the people you surround yourself with and their knowledge and their experiences, only allows you to make better decisions and assessments that make you more successful. So, like, the actual ROI on being more diverse and inclusive as a white person is you then, in giving access to other people and opening doors. I'm working on projects with Sami where, that are Spanish language, and I don't speak Spanish, and I would never have gotten that gig if Sami didn't open that door for me. So it's, it's a mutual relationship, and it's not just the, like, oh, we have to do this to fill a quota. Like, no, there's actual tangible benefits from the business standpoint. I know Kingsford Charcoal used to have an all-white leadership team, and Kingsford Charcoal was actually about to go under, and they decided on a whim to bring in another person to give some ideas. That person happened to be, I believe, of Mexican descent. And that person was like, well, why don't you ever, promote to Mexicans or Latina families? And they're like, well, why would we do that? And he's like, well, we get together and barbecue, like, food is our thing. So if you marketed to us and invited us, like, we would cook with Kingsford Charcoal. And sure enough, that move ended up saving the company, and they ended up being more successful than they ever were beforehand. But it took bringing, somebody opened the door, bringing somebody to the table to give a new idea, and the company, actually turned themselves around from failing to being, thriving better than they ever did before.
Right. The thing is, though, now is that with the younger generation, where things aren't measured so much, or solely by money. Right. This charcoal company, I don't know when this happened, but, also has to factor in commitment to community.
Right.
So it's not just, so, for all those companies out there, yeah, it's a two lane, street, it's a give and take, but also the authenticity aspect is like, yeah, it's like, I just read this yesterday. Someone was saying it's like, about the vaccines, how they're trying to get the vaccines to communities of color, and that the Hispanic community is really struggling to gain access to the vaccine. And so they were saying, one of these a Latino advocate was saying, if they want to sell us diapers, they'll know where to find us. It's like, if they want to sell it, you can, it's not that hard.
Yeah.
So that's also very important here, that it can't be, because then it's not cool, and it's not, it's just a transactional relationship. Yep. And I think that we're in a time right now, in a special time, in history, where I think most people, I want to believe, are looking for purpose, and for a more meaningful engagement. And so, yeah, so there's a value in that. But yeah, absolutely. Hey, if nothing else, do it first, because, engage first, because, you want to save your business. And then hopefully that dynamic and that, exchange will lead to, wanting to better understand the diverse communities around you. So it's really cool.
And what you say, the example that you bring out, this is so important. If we're framing this in conversation to the mentors and the potential people who can open the doors, I mean, earlier you talked about, like, when you hear people say, like, oh, I want to have more diversity, or I want to take a different perspective, and you ask, how committed are you? And that's the whole thing, is that, like, if you are comfortable in your reality, I'm going to be very surprised if you are actually able to build diversity in your company, in your life, because what ends up happening is if you really dive into this, is that that you find out you actually don't know everything. And those transactional relationships, I've built many mentor programs, and that's usually how people approach like mentors. You know, they say, okay, you know, Sami's like an expert in community organizing, entrepreneurship, and this person needs that. And then, so I'm just going to match you up, and you're going to bring all your expertise and like the great master of knowledge you're going to teach. And that feels really fun for a lot of people. You get to walk in and you're so powerful, right? You're the wise one. But that's not necessarily the case when you're working with diverse founders, because what's going to happen is because they're having to take a different path, because the things that work for you don't necessarily work for them. The way for you to successfully have that transaction is that you are going to have to learn. You're going to have to let go of your assumptions, because your assumptions are about something that apply to you only. and one, and two, you're going to have to start thinking about, like, you're going to see the elephant from a different perspective. You've been looking at the trunk, and this person's looking at the left leg or the tail, and they're saying, well, that's not what it looks like for me. So let me just teach you about the world from this perspective.
Yeah.
And you either have the opportunity, like you mentioned with the charcoal company, to take advantage of that new knowledge and to expand. Or, you know, or to just feel really frustrated. And it's definitely, like you said, it's a meeting. It's a co-learning experience. And in this experience where your ego or your need to have like a certain positioning in terms of that social power, you need to let it go.
Yep.
Yeah.
So not everybody is ready for that, but I think that we are living in a really exciting time in which we're at the tipping point, and that readiness has suddenly, you know, exploded. There's all these people who are like, I can't live in this world where, you know, I have to watch somebody die on a cell phone video. I don't want to be a part of that anymore.
Yeah.
How do I show up? And we don't actually
all show up in our full power.
Right.
We have to all show up in our full power. And that is a more complicated proposition that we think. And there is no one person. We live in an individual expert society. And that is, I just don't subscribe to that. There are many people who have genius, but the genius of even just this conversation is the synergy of all our lived experience and the knowledge that we bring together. That's how we figure things out, not because some expert is going to, you know, just be touched by God or something.
Yeah.
Well, and honestly, I was just going to say, it is those, and some of you made a good point. Yeah, it's like, don't just focus on the tangible return on investment, like focus on actually building that relationship and getting to know the person, because that trust and that relationship is what helps to build the equity. Where, to your point, Blanca, you know, the different pathways, and this, I just remember this in, again, in another arts community reference, but, where there were, grant applications, and they were saying, well, we, you know, made more diverse arts organizations aware of this grant application, but nobody was submitting. And then, so we actually went and looked at the application, and the, requirements for that application were very much geared towards, you know, a white led organization with the donors already in place and the support from the community and government support, etc. So it came down to, you know, the actual equity of learning about the communities to say, okay, well, what can you, or what status can we get you to, or how can we get you to the same level or same place, knowing that you're going to have to take a different path to get here. So if, you know, if there was to your point earlier about climbing up the mountain, if there was an actual, you know, a map that was in multiple languages that was clear for everybody that said, hey, this is the path to take to go up the mountain, and this is the path to come down.
You wouldn't have to listen to that. Yes, exactly.
Right.
Yeah. Well, but that's so interesting that you bring that up, because that's a big part of the work that I do. A big part, like in program design, what I do, that's like creating that map. And I can tell you, I get feedback all the time of like, well, that's kind of like coddling or hand holding. And you know why? Because the people who have always had access to the easier way, it's built into their network knowledge, so they don't even realize that they have been handheld and supported and walked through.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Like, why should we do that? And it's like, because that's how you got there. You think it was like a miracle. No, you had the map. We just didn't.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Yeah. And I think that that's one of the things that, you know, I gotta say I admire about Chris, is that engagement, you know, that like you really invest time in engaging at a deep personal level, you know, with everybody you meet. I don't know, and I mean, I've seen you, you know, throughout the years, you know, and I've experienced it myself, you know, from just a person to person level, you know, and I think that if we all practice that, right? Because we have that in our communities too, you know, it's like,
Totally.
oh, you know, I'm from Puerto Rico and you're from, you know, Cuba or whatever.
Oh, you're from Argentina and I'm Chilena and you're Peruvian. I know.
For the most part, it's all, you know, good. But you know what I'm saying? You always get people, you know, that have a stank attitude. And so, so, I mean, just coming from that place of wanting to connect, you know, at a deeper level is really, really critical for us to all move forward. But listen, we're
long podcast.
It's just gonna be some editing.
Right.
No, we're good. No editing on this one. It's all good. I'm so glad we finally, you know, got to do this. Blanca, I'm so glad you met Chris. You know, I'm sure
me
we're
too.
gonna, you know, work together on something together, you know, soon enough. And I'm just excited, you know, to know you, and I admire the work you do and the impact that you have, you know, on so many families, because that's the thing, when you impact one, you know, woman that has little to no access to the resources she needs to start her own business or to scale it, you know, you're impacting community like nobody's business. I mean, because, you know, these are many of them are single moms, you know, head of households, you know, or the first in their families, you know, to either, you know, get a higher education or even start, you know, the you know, to build a business from scratch. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you. I'm so grateful for all the work that you do. And you're right. You know, you Kendi Valdez, who's a tech founder that I work with, she's awesome. Look her up. She said to me, she was like, yeah, it's different for us because when we build our companies, we bring our communities with us. And that is absolutely right. When we get to do this work, if you have the opportunity to help these entrepreneurs, you are impacting a community of people to rise up, to build, to flourish in the world. And it's a privilege and a gift to get to do this work. I'm the lucky one.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Blanca. Really. Okay. Now, and I'll call you offline. Okay.
So, okay. Sounds good. Okay. It's great to be here.
Take care. Bye-bye.
See you later, Blanca.
See you later.
This concludes this episode of I Have Something to Say. We want to thank you for tuning in. Don't forget to tell your friends about us. We're on Spotify and iTunes as well. There's more to come next week. And remember, if you have something to say, it's time to speak up.